There's something called the Osiris Shaft, which is located directly under the causeway between the Sphinx and the second pyramid. And it goes about 100 feet underground. It's carved out of the limestone bedrock. It's the creepiest place I've ever been in my life. It's disturbing.
In 2025, footage from beneath the Giza Plateau started circulating online. It showed archaeologists chest deep in black water, climbing around a stone coffin sitting on an island in an underground lake. Human bones were visible on the floors above. Thick black residue coated giant stone coffins.
Inside the second level of the Osiris Shaft system. And as I was researching in preparation for this expedition, I came across a research team that had taken chemical analysis of the material that you see coating this container.
There were no inscriptions, no prayers, and no clear answers. The site is called the Osiris Shaft, and it sits under the causeway between the Sphinx and the second pyramid. What is down there is real. What it means is not settled. The deeper you go, the stranger it gets. The legend becomes physical. For a long time, the idea of secret chambers under Giza sounded like tourist talk. Local guides told stories about flooded tunnels and underground tombs. Children in nearby villages said that if you stomped on certain points in the ground, you could hear hollows below. The stories lined up with something written more than 2,000 years ago by the Greek writer Herodotus. He recorded that a ruler of Egypt was buried in a chamber surrounded by water on an island inside a man-made lake. Most historians did not take that literally. Herodotus is famous, but he is not always reliable. He mixed eyewitness reporting with rumor and state propaganda. For decades, underground lake tomb sat in the same category as other ancient claims that no one could prove. Interesting, but probably exaggerated. That changed in 1933 when Egyptian archaeologist Selim Hassan was working near the causeway of the Pyramid of Khafra, the second large pyramid of Giza. His team opened a vertical shaft cut straight into bedrock. At first, it looked like a simple well. Then they realized it kept going. A shaft dropped to a chamber. From that chamber, another shaft dropped even deeper. Hassan tried to excavate it. He brought in pumps. He brought in workers. The problem was water. Groundwater kept flooding the lower levels. He would drain it, and within hours the chambers would fill again. He fought that water for 4 years. In the end, he had to stop. Not because the shaft ended, but because the site would not let him continue without drowning the work. He did not reach the lowest level. He could not prove the lake story. He did, however, map a multi-level vertical complex cut into stone, and he logged coffins and later burials from Egypt's late period. He dated the use of the site to around 600 BCE and moved on. For most of the 20th century, the shaft sat open but ignored. Local kids swam in its water. Tourists walked past it without knowing it was there. It showed up in excavation notes and then faded out of public view. The legend went quiet, but it never fully died. The unanswered question stayed the same. Was Herodotus lying, or had he actually described something real under Giza? What brought a new team back to the site in the late 1990s? If the story of the lake coffin was true, what else had been missed under the plateau? The first level, a room with no voice. In 1999, Egyptologist Zahi Hawass led a new descent into what is now known as the Osiris Shaft. This time the team had modern pumps, safety gear, better lighting, and cameras. They forced back the groundwater enough to reach areas Selim Hassan could only document from above. About 6 meters, 20 feet, below the surface, they entered the first chamber. On paper, the space sounds plain. It is a small limestone room cut out of solid bedrock. There are no decorations on the walls. There are no painted scenes, no carved spells, no hieroglyphs asking the gods for protection. The walls are bare stone. The floor is plain. There are no grave goods. That may not sound dramatic, but in Egyptian archaeology, it is a red flag. Egyptian burial spaces are rarely silent. Even minor tombs for normal citizens often include some kind of offering niche, personal items, carved name, or prayer for the afterlife. The dead were not sent off quietly. The souls of the dead were supposed to be supported by words, symbols, and ritual. A space like this is not normal. Members of the team said the air felt heavy and stale. Light did not travel far. Sound did not carry right. The chamber did not feel like a final resting place. It felt like an entry checkpoint. The most striking part of that first level is what sits below it. In the middle of the floor is another cut shaft, dropping even deeper. You stand in that first chamber and you understand right away that you are not done. The space is not the goal, it is the doorway. This is where the modern team had to make a choice. Stop and document what was already unusual, or keep going into a much tighter descent with less safety margin. They kept going. If the first room was intentionally plain, what did the builders think waited below it that mattered so much? The second level, bones and stone coffins. The second level sits about 12 more meters down. Here, the tone of the site changes fast. The team entered a rectangular room carved with clean lines. Cut into the walls were side niches. Pushed into those niches were giant stone coffins, also called sarcophagi. These were not small boxes. These were huge slabs of stone, some so large that even with modern gear, it would be hard to move them. One coffin was wedged into place in a way that actually blocked an opening. It looks less like storage and more like deliberate seal. Now for the disturbing part. The sarcophagi are blank. No name, no title, no hieroglyphs, no god figures, no paint, nothing. In ancient Egypt, coffins almost always carry identity. A coffin with no name is already strange. Several of them in one chamber is even stranger. Then there were the human remains on the floor. Bones lay scattered across the chamber. At first glance, people thought tomb robbery. Looters, chaos, disrespect. But then physical anthropologists and a surgeon looked more closely. The pattern was not random. Many of the bones seemed to come from only one side of the body. Right ribs, right legs, right arms, right halves. That is not how normal Egyptian burial works. Ancient Egyptian religion focused on keeping the body whole. The idea was that the physical body had to be complete, so the person could live in the afterlife. Organs were removed, yes, but they were stored. Parts were not supposed to be scattered, so why were partial bodies arranged in a controlled chamber with giant sealed coffins? Some researchers have pointed out that the god Osiris, ruler of the underworld, was said to have been killed, cut into pieces, and reassembled. That story is central to Egyptian religion. It explains both death and rebirth. But it is still shocking to see anything that looks like an echo of that story acted out in a physical room with real human remains. On top of that, thick black material was found coating parts of the coffins and even streaking down walls. Tests on samples described a blend of resins, oils, beeswax, and bitumen. These are the same substances used in mummification, but here they were spread over stone instead of skin. In ancient Egyptian color language, black is not evil. Black stands for rebirth and fertile renewal, like the rich soil left by the Nile flood. Covering these coffins in black embalming material could be read as coating them in the idea of resurrection. Then comes the practical problem. How did these giant coffins even get here? The vertical shaft above is so narrow that a single person has to angle their body to climb. The coffins weigh many tons each. Lowering them down a tight chute without breaking them should not be possible using known Old Kingdom or late period methods. Carving them in place is one guess. Sliding them down slowly while filling and emptying sand is another guess. No one has a final answer. The chamber on the second level raised two clear ideas. First, whatever happened down here was not normal burial. Second, somebody wanted to block access to whatever was even deeper. Why seal a passage with a stone coffin unless you are protecting what lies below it? The third level, the lake and the island. About 30 meters, close to 100 feet under the Giza Plateau. The shaft opens into the most talked-about space in the entire system. This is the level that gave the Osiris Shaft its name and made even veteran archaeologists admit they felt uneasy. The air turns cold and wet. The rock underfoot gets slick. Pumps have to run almost non-stop to keep the water level manageable. The team steps off the ladder and into a flooded cavern. In front of them, still, dark groundwater pooled in a natural basin carved within the bedrock. The water is calm and black. In the center of that water is a raised stone platform, like a rectangular island. Resting on that platform is a massive granite sarcophagus. Read that again. A stone coffin sits on what is basically an artificial island in an underground lake under Giza. This is almost exactly what Herodotus described more than 2,000 years ago. For years, people dismissed his island tomb in water as a fantasy. But this chamber forces a second look. 4 stone pillars stand around the coffin, like markers. The sarcophagus itself is huge, on the order of 10 to 15 tons. It shows mineral crust from long exposure to water. The chamber is cut and arranged in a way that looks designed, not accidental. The logistics are hard to explain. How do you lower a multi-ton granite box from the surface through narrow vertical shafts and somehow place it gently on top of a platform that is surrounded by water? Ancient builders did move heavy stone, yes. The pyramids prove that. But this is not an open ramp system. This is a vertical drop through bedrock. When they were finally able to open the sarcophagus, it was empty. No mummy, no grave goods, no carved spells, nothing. That emptiness matters. An empty coffin in a sacred setting is not useless. It is called a cenotaph. A cenotaph is a symbolic tomb for a figure who is not physically present. Many experts now believe the flooded third level is not the burial of a specific human king. It is a ritual setting built to honor Osiris himself, the god associated with death, rebirth, and the underworld. In Egyptian belief, water is not just water. The underworld, known as the Duat, is often described as a place reached by traveling through darkness and water. The Nile flood each year was tied to the rebirth of Osiris and the renewal of Egypt. So from that point of view, placing a sarcophagus on an island in a controlled underground pool is not random drama. It is a physical recreation of death, judgment, and return. The chamber also behaves in a way that feels intentional. Sound in this flooded level does not echo the way you expect. A single voice bounces and rolls until it sounds multiplied, like a chant answered by other voices in the dark. Engineers and acoustics researchers who have modeled the space say that the shape of the room, plus water, plus stone, creates unusual audio feedback. A priest performing a ritual here thousands of years ago would not have sounded alone. So this level gives us several facts. There is an underground water chamber. It holds a central coffin on a stone island. The coffin is empty. The space appears to act like a stage for a ritual linked to Osiris. The description lines up with ancient writing that experts once called fantasy. If a story from 450 BCE turns out to be telling the truth about a chamber under Giza, what else in that story deserves a second look? Engineering problems and time problems. After the new excavations, a simple question came up. How old is this thing? You might think that would be easy to answer. You date the bones, the pottery, and the coffins. The problem is that different parts of the shaft point to different time periods, and they are not close together. Some pottery and loose human remains in the second level match Egypt's late period, around the 26th dynasty, roughly 600 BCE. That would support Selim Hassan's original dating. It would also make sense with the thick black embalming material and the style of reuse seen in other late period sites, where older structures were adopted and turned into cult centers for gods like Osiris. But other finds do not agree with that date. Certain pottery fragments match styles from the Old Kingdom, around the 4th to 5th dynasty, which is roughly the same era as the building of the pyramids, more than 1,000 years earlier than those late-period bones. Thermoluminescence tests on some of the stone elements, including at least one large coffin, point toward Old Kingdom or even Pyramid Age ranges. Thermoluminescence is a method where scientists measure trapped energy in minerals to estimate how long it has been since the object was heated or exposed to sunlight. It is not perfect, but it is widely used. If those results are correct, then parts of the Osiris Shaft are as old as the main pyramid complex itself. That would mean this was not a new, late-period creation. It was already ancient in 600 BCE, and priests from that time went down there, added their own dead and rituals, and kept the site active. That idea fits Egyptian behavior. Sacred places were often reused. A temple, a shaft, or a chamber with strong symbolic power could stay in use for centuries or even millennia. A priest in 600 BCE could walk into a space cut in 2500 BCE and feel like he was entering the oldest holy ground on earth. There is also the question of the stone itself. Some of the sarcophagi and stone elements appear to be made from rocks that are not local to Giza, and in some cases not local to Egypt at all. We are talking about dense volcanic material, like diorite and andesite, in blocks weighing tens of tons. These stones would have had to be mined elsewhere, dragged across long distances, lowered by some method down a vertical shaft, and then set in a tight underground room with almost no clearance. Even with modern cranes and trucks, moving 40-ton blocks into a narrow vertical cavity would be a logistics job that takes serious planning. So either the builders carved the shaft and chambers around pre-placed stone, or they had transport methods we still cannot fully map using the current physical evidence. Finally, there are the side passages. Off the lowest levels are tight tunnels, too narrow for most adults to crawl through safely. Ground scans hint that some of these passages angle toward the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid. We do not yet have full, verified maps of these links, and Egyptian authorities are careful about approving deep tunneling under major monuments for safety reasons. But if those connections are real, then the Osiris Shaft is not an isolated whole. It is part of a network. If Giza was planned as one system that included not only the famous pyramids on the surface, but also a ritual path underground, then we may be looking at a religious landscape, not just a set of tombs. If the shaft really ties the Sphinx, the causeway, and the plateau into one ritual circuit focused on rebirth and the afterlife, what does that say about what the builders thought they were building at Giza in the first place? What the Osiris Shaft might actually be? The simplest way to describe the Osiris Shaft is a multi-level underground complex with coffins and water. That is technically true, but it is not satisfying. The site does not act like a standard tomb. It does not act like a standard temple. It sits somewhere in between. There are almost no inscriptions. That breaks normal Egyptian rules. There are giant sealed coffins with no names. That breaks normal Egyptian rules. There are human remains that appear to have been intentionally separated by body half. That breaks normal Egyptian rules. There is a stone coffin on an island in a deep flooded chamber. That matches a single ancient text people used to laugh at. At this point, some researchers have stopped trying to label the Osiris Shaft as a tomb at all. Instead, they see it as a ritual device. In plain words, that means it may have been built to create an experience. Imagine you are a priest or an initiate. You climb down a vertical shaft into stale air. You step into a bare stone room that feels like a cutoff from the world above. You keep going. You reach a chamber full of huge coffins, black resin, and human remains arranged in a way that forces you to think about death, cutting, loss, and reassembly. Then you are led even deeper. You enter cold water in near total dark. You see a coffin sitting on an island. Your voice echoes back at you in ways that make it sound like something else is in the room. That is not a simple burial. That is a guided passage. In that sense, the Osiris Shaft may have been used to act out the death and return of Osiris as a live ritual. It could have been a place where priests reenacted the moment of dismemberment, mourning, and resurrection, using sound, water, and light to make the story feel real. It could have served as a symbolic gate to the underworld for certain ranks of clergy, or as a controlled setting for initiation. Some archaeologists accept parts of this idea. Others push back and say we are reading too much into scattered bones and unfinished rock. They argue that later reuse by priests in the late period could have changed the original purpose, mixing normal burials with staged ritual deposits and creating a confusing layer cake of activity. There is also the harder edge of speculation. Because of the strange acoustics, the imported stone, the weight of the coffins, the black resins, and the possible tunnels toward the Sphinx and the pyramids, some people argue the shaft is evidence of a lost level of engineering, maybe even from a culture older than dynastic Egypt. That view is popular online and in fringe books, but it has not been proven with accepted dating and material studies. Still, even mainstream teams admit the site does not make for an easy, clean textbook answer, and that is where things currently stand. The Osiris Shaft is real. You can film it, you can test the residue, you can date the bones, you can scan the stone. What you cannot do yet is tell one simple story that fits all the facts. So here is the position most serious researchers land on. The Osiris Shaft looks less like a tomb for one king, and more like a physical stage for the Osiris cycle: death, cutting, mourning, and rebirth from the water. It was likely reused for many centuries. It may link into a larger plan under Giza we still do not fully understand. Parts of it are still flooded and unsafe to enter. The lowest passages are still off limits. If even one more sealed chamber lies past those flooded corridors, what else is still waiting below the plateau? The Osiris Shaft does not give comfort. It does not wrap up Egypt into a neat line from pyramid builders to late priests and call it done. It shows us a hidden structure under Giza that mixes human bone, massive stone coffins, black embalming resin, deep water, strange sound.